I'm Debbie Georgatos. Welcome to my show, America Can We Talk? Today, we're going to talk about the Floyd Chauvin mistrial. Harvard-trained Dr. Peter Breggin joins me. America Can We Talk membership, and the truth is emerging about January 6th at the Capitol. And of course, I'll tell you why these stories matter to you. Stay tuned.
Debbie Georgatos, host of America Can We Talk, is an author, attorney, and political analyst whose mission is to inspire the American political conversation about preserving liberty in the best country on earth.
Hello again and welcome to America Can We Talk and to today's First Five. I'm Debbie Georgatos. We talked yesterday on this show a little bit about the idea of due process, and my lawyer head goes to this because I want to urge people to understand due process is one of the most fundamental guarantees of the American Constitution, of American jurisprudence, and it's really one of the most fundamental guarantees that tells individual citizens, no matter what the accusation is against you, no matter what the public perception is, you have a right to a fair trial with a whole laundry list of protections our system builds in. I want to go back and talk a little bit about the George Floyd trial, the trial of the officer involved in the shooting and the death of George Floyd, and I want to hit three quick points. Number one, last night, the defense attorney, the attorney defending Officer Chauvin, made a motion for a mistrial. And he basically said to the judge, he moved for mistrial on the argument that the protests outside of the courthouse, some of the language used by the prosecutors in their closing arguments, they have unique rules in Minnesota. This is a state court, remember, so unique rules in Minnesota relating to what you can say in their closing argument. So he had arguments. So the lawyer for Officer Chauvin argued about the crowds outside, and he argued about the language used by the prosecutors in closing arguments, and he pointed out Maxine Waters, an actual member of Congress who was outside the courthouse making very incendiary statements about the trial, and it felt very close to threatening the jury, you better find him guilty or else. Well, I want to ask Matt, the wonderful producer. He has a very short clip to play. This is the judge's response to the motion for mistrial.
Congresswoman Waters was talking specifically about this trial and about the unacceptability of anything less than a murder conviction, and talk about being confrontational. But you can submit the press articles about that. This goes back to what I've been saying from the beginning. I wish elected officials would stop talking about this case, especially in a manner that is disrespectful to the rule of law and to the judicial branch and our function. I think if they want to give their opinions, they should do so in a respectful and in a manner that is consistent with their oath to the Constitution, to respect a co-equal branch of government. Their failure to do so, I think, is abhorrent, but I don't think it has prejudiced us with additional material that would prejudice this jury. They have been told not to watch the news. I trust they are following those instructions, and that there is not in any way a prejudice to the defendant.
Okay, I want to add on. I didn't get to the point in the clip I sent to Matt. The judge had made the statement that possibly what Maxine Waters has said will provide grounds for a reversal. If there is a criminal conviction, will provide grounds for a reversal of the jury's decision. And so this judge is saying, and I got to say, I've tried cases in front of a jury, and I know that, you know, most people who serve on juries, they try to do the right thing. They try to be honest and fair. I mean, you really go, it's a very grueling process to choose a jury, especially in a huge case like this. But the notion of relying on the jury not to be watching the news, I mean, I hope they're all moral and noble people who do not do it. But the temptation as a juror, as you're sitting there all day watching the evidence, of course you're interested in what the media is saying about the trial. The jury is now sequestered because they now have the case, they're deliberating. But it's a really dicey question whether this judge should have on the grounds already what was presented, granted the motion for a mistrial, because this is a guy, an officer, the entire country saw the video involving his arrest of George Floyd. Whatever it is you think about that, he's entitled to due process. And one other point I want to make in closing out the first five is this. I didn't get to this yesterday, but a whole other aspect of this idea of a trial where you're guaranteed due process, a presumption of innocence, is the idea that witnesses are supposed to feel comfortable to testify in court, to tell whether they are, eyewitnesses to some sequence of events or they're expert witnesses. And in this case, there was an expert witness who testified for the defense. And he's a former police officer and testified with respect to the question of whether or not the physical restraining hold that Officer Chauvin used on George Floyd was permissible. Is that okay to do? And basically the answer was it was permissible under Minneapolis Police Department authority at that time. It's since been changed, but at the time it was permissible. So this guy, this officer, this former officer who testified, used to live in California. He had a home in California, but he had sold it. So he's moved out. The home is owned by somebody else, and the new owner, during this trial, the new owner of this home, I think it was Santa Rosa, California, wherever it was, literally walked out one morning out of his home that he had purchased from this police officer and discovered the bloody, severed head of a pig. This is activists of some kind trying to threaten a witness, trying to threaten him about the testimony related to whether or not this officer acted appropriately. This is so egregious and so outrageous. And I want to close the first five by saying this. I do not know if those people who did that, brought the severed head to the police officer witness's home, I don't know if they're so outraged by all of the clamor about this case that they actually thought this was kind of a good idea, a moral, justified idea. But I want you to think of the level of outrage. I mean, you might be mad about something. You might go home and tell your husband or wife, I am livid. You might write a letter to the editor. You might tell your 10 best friends when you're getting dinner together what you think about something. To take the action of severing a pig's head, locating the home address of a witness, and driving there, and obviously must be done at cover of night, to leave a severed pig's head on someone's porch you don't even know because you're angry. The level of anger involved in that kind of decision is off the charts. Or the other choice, of course, is this was a paid bunch of thugs who delivered the severed pig's head to this officer's house. Either way, conduct was outrageous, and yet another example of how we're making a mockery of the most noble criminal justice system on the planet Earth. It isn't perfect, and it can always be improved upon. Most noble criminal justice system on the planet Earth being, at the very least, interfered with by belligerent rioters, by members of Congress, speaking out outside the courtroom, and by people who are either paid or outraged to intimidate witnesses. This is a disgusting commentary. This is a disgusting picture of where the criminal justice system stands in America. And in great part, it is due to the agitation of the left, who simply believes we don't have to have a trial. Maxine Waters is saying that. We don't really care what the evidence was. We don't care what the witnesses said. We don't care what the standard of law is. We don't care what the judge instructed the jury. We've decided he's guilty, so therefore he must be guilty. And as I really, truly am closing up the first five today, President Biden spoke at the White House today and expressed, he didn't say better, he wasn't as bad as Maxine Waters saying you better find him guilty. He said, I sure hope the jury gets to the right verdict. The president weighing in on a pending case before a jury in this country. Outrageous, irresponsible, I can't even think of the right words, immoral, unethical, terrible. And it was reported that President Biden had called the family of George Floyd last night, called them at home to express his concern, his condolences, all of that. I understand calling someone if you lost a loved one in any circumstance that exists on earth. It's a wonderful and gracious thing to call the family and say, truly sorry, may I help you? Anything I can do to help. Those kind of loving gestures. This is a president scoring political points because obviously it wasn't a private call. He places this call. It's all over the media today. This is a president trying to score political points by calling George Floyd's family to apologize. The whole thing's a mess. And honestly, I go back to where I started yesterday with and today. If you don't have due process honored in this country, you have literally destroyed the ability to have a just criminal justice system. And that, my very fine friends, is today's First Five. So I said at the start of the show, we have a guest joining us. I wanted to say a little bit about him, then he'll join us in just a moment. This is a doctor named Peter Breggin, and he's a psychiatrist, and we could talk a lot about the things he's done, the advances he's done in the world of psychiatry and bringing to light the concerns about whether or not people can adequately give informed consent if they are in some compromised situation of any kind. He's worked at those kind of things. He's worked on trying to challenge electronic, I can't even say the name, electronic therapy, basically shock treatment, questioning the morality, the legality of that. But he has a new book out, or almost out, and the book we're going to talk about is called COVID-19 and the Global Predators, and the subtitle is We Are the Prey, as in P-R-E-Y, prey. So, COVID-19 and the Global Predators, We Are the Prey, Dr. Peter Breggin, medical doctor, psychiatrist, and trained in part at Harvard. And he's written a book really about COVID-19 and a whole host of issues surrounding COVID-19. What I want to focus mostly on today is his notions, his views on the subject of vaccine passports. Without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Peter Breggin to the show.
It's wonderful to be here. That was a great 5-minute intro you did. Thank you for doing that. We need people to speak out honestly about this.
We most certainly do. We most certainly do. Okay, so I know you've written other books. I'm not going to get into them, but you are really a prolific writer in addition to having testified and been an activist in various ways. I want to just get right to I think I want to get right to the COVID things. I mean, I think it'd be so interesting to hear about why you got involved in challenging certain procedures that were being done for patients in mental hospitals. And actually, just very quickly, you got involved in all of this because there were procedures being done at mental hospitals that it appeared as though the patients had given consent for them, but you were challenging that. Can you quickly tell what your point was in getting involved in that?
Well, I got started trying to stop and was successful in stopping the return of old-fashioned lobotomies and electroshock treatment, which is mutilating the brain of the person. You can do it with electricity, you can do it with scalpels, you can put in poisons. All those things were being done. And what you're talking about is a very key trial called the Kamowitz trial, in which a patient in a Michigan State hospital consented, supposedly, in fact, consented to the Commissioner of Mental Health of the state to have experimental psychosurgery. They were going to put electrodes in his head. They were going to stimulate him, experiment on him, and then burn holes, basically, to correct his violence. And it turned out he wasn't violent at all. And in fact, once the trial started, a 3-judge panel, they just let him go. And then the judges insisted on stopping or examining at least the further experiments that were planned. I was simultaneously conducting an international campaign to stop psychosurgery, so I was a natural for the case. And what I tried to show the judges was not only was this intervention only going to work by blunting, subduing, making a person docile, which is a key to understanding totalitarianism, authoritarianism, abuses of all kind, aim at making people more docile. And I gave the history of the hospitals to show that the Nuremberg Code would apply, that if you're confined to an institution where you have no freedom, where you're subject to abuse, where you're threatened, you're just not volunteering when you volunteer for something. So the Jews weren't volunteering for freezing experiments when they knew they were going to go to the gas chambers as an alternative. So we ended up winning that case, and it stopped all the psychosurgery in federal and state facilities. Now, recently I started applying the Nuremberg Code to nursing homes and jails and saying, since the vaccines are entirely experimental, they have not been officially approved as safe and effective, they're approved under an emergency code that's set up by the federal government called the EUA. And basically, they're experimenting on all of us. There's no question about that. The methods are unique. They've never been studied in animals or humans for the RNA vaccines. And as I was talking about this, my wife Ginger, who's my co-author and my partner and just an amazing intellect, and she said, well, that's true, but isn't that the same condition we have in society today? Our friends are afraid to refuse the vaccine because they can't go to Cornell or some other universities, that they may not be allowed to work, they may not be allowed to fly, they may be required to have a passport that they took the vaccine in order literally to have a normal life. Doesn't the Nuremberg Code apply to our nation because we're becoming a totalitarian nation? I said, Ginger, that's brilliant. And we wrote a blog about that. And I'm just really grateful to get a chance to pass this concept on to you.
I love the analogy. And actually, I love that you work with your wife. My husband and I work together a lot, too. It's such a blessing, such a great thing.
Oh, my God, yeah.
Yep. Okay.
I wish you were here to straighten my collar.
You look sensational. You look great. Okay. So on the subject of this passport thing, there's so many aspects I want to go at. But to start with, the whole concept of a COVID passport, the concept is you either showing that you are immune because you have you've had the disease and you're now carrying the antibodies, or you've had the vaccination and so you're supposedly protected. But so the notion is that this would give you kind of as you're saying, your ticket to get freedom again. But that presumes that somehow the COVID passport is keeping you, I'm not a doctor, I'm a lawyer, but the whole idea of the vaccine is to keep you from contracting the disease. So what difference does it make if I've got the vaccine and I think I'm safe? Why does anyone else, everyone has the choice to take the vaccine or not, but so what's the point of having a passport? You're kind of telling people it's really just an arm-twisting method to force you to get a vaccine, because the COVID vaccine itself doesn't prevent the spread of COVID in any other ways on the planet, correct?
Well, that's where you're absolutely correct. They're not accepting that. They're using pseudoscience that'll stop you from becoming a carrier, stop you from actually getting the disease and spreading it, and so on and so forth. And it actually, at best, these vaccines will give you a lesser illness. But frankly, and I've come out as a scientist and as a physician and with other physicians said the vaccines are probably far more dangerous than COVID-19. Right now, the CDC is vastly inflating the death rates of COVID-19 to terrorize people. All this, the whole COVID-19 is a cover story for totalitarianism and enriching billionaires. It's twofold. Weakening America so that we can have this globalist governance outside of democracies, outside of democratic republics, outside of patriotic nations. They want a global mishmash that they can manipulate and control. That's the purpose number two, and purpose number one, which they're achieving as well, is getting billions and billions of dollars through the vaccines. But the ultimate point is that none of it is really about medicine. If it were, all the vaccines would have been stopped, because the CDC has disclosed that at this point over 2,500 people have died in the United States in close association with taking the RNA, the mRNA viruses, which are the most dominant ones in America. And that means most of them have died on the first day or the first 48 hours. That is a direct association. When you have a pattern, it's causality. And the FDA has literally said, they don't think any of these are caused by the vaccine. What are they talking about? They haven't done an investigation. And obviously, it's a pattern. And I can tell you from years and years of working in legal cases surrounding the use of the data, going into the FDA, going into the CDC, that if this were anything except the COVID-19 cover story, all the vaccines would be off the market. And they are being taken off in multiple countries around the world.
Yeah, they sure are. I want to be sure to give adequate attention to your book. I mean, I just printed out the table of contents. It's an extensive coverage of the issue, again, for my listeners. It's called COVID-19 and the Global Predators, We Are the Prey, by Dr. Peter Breggin, which is Breggin, and Ginger Breggin, whom you were just hearing about, his wife. And the chapters run through, I mean, you're talking about COVID-19 and Fauci's role in it, the made in China, whether it was intentionally released. And also you talked about, you have a chapter relating to killing patients to make inexpensive good drugs look bad. This is one of the things that was brought out early on by many doctors, that hydroxychloroquine worked well, ivermectin, inhaled budesonide. There were treatments that not only were not being widely prescribed, but that were being crushed by and aspersions cast, suspicion cast, concern cast, coming out of Washington, statements out of Fauci, NIH, kind of diminishing the efficacy of these treatments. And the doctors were coming to my show saying, why? I mean, one doctor...
We know why now.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
We absolutely know why. They engineered a new legislation in January 2017, which, by the way, is the time when Bill Gates announced that he was developing something that would later on become, the Operation Warp Speed. He was planning it in January, announcing it. He'd already been working on it in January 2017. That same month, January, they got passed in the Congress the Emergency Use Authority, so that they could bypass the FDA and get a red stamp without proving safety or efficacy if a drug was urgently needed or a vaccine was urgently needed. And the caveat was that if they had a safe and effective drug, it's written into the legislation, if there was already a safe and effective drug, then they couldn't rush through a drug or vaccine. So Bill Gates had already bet billions on it. Moderna had been working on this for 3 years. This did not start during COVID-19, 3 years beforehand. They were tooling up for this. They had just found out they could make COVID-19 into a pathogen in the labs, working with China. All this is in the book, documents. No conspiracy stuff here whatsoever. So if hydroxychloroquine were reasonably safe and effective, they could not have done Operation Warp Speed. They couldn't have done the Great Reset of bringing corporations and government together. They couldn't have paid millions and millions to the drug companies from federal agencies to work on the vaccines. All of this is about the billions of dollars empowering globalism, and then about globalism, which can only succeed if America is weakened. So if you put the two things together, make billions, weaken America, all in the interest of globalism, you can figure out what's going on. Can I quickly say something unique about the book?
Absolutely.
We didn't want to wait for people to have to wait for the information. So the book will be out in June or July, but we want the information out. So we have actually arranged so that every time somebody buys an advanced copy of the book, they instantly get the working manuscript. No authors have ever done that before. So if you go, and where you go, it's a dedicated website. It's wearetheprey.com. wearetheprey.com. Go to wearetheprey.com, buy the book at a reduced rate, and you will get a working manuscript in your mailbox, hopefully at the speed of light, instantly. And we're still working on the book and the manuscript. Many doctors have read it and love the book. We have introductions by the 3 top COVID-19 doctors. So as a psychiatrist, I am a physician and a scientist, but I am so proud to have the frontline doctors, Peter McCullough, and Zev Zelenko, the men who got this whole thing together, and Dr. Vliet, who wrote wrote a book on how to do this. And by the way, one other thing, not for me, but for everybody else in the world, you can get inexpensive, safe treatment for COVID-19. They're lying to you. Go to the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons. That's AAPS Internet or AAPS.com. The Association of American Physicians and Surgeons. And you can very quickly, through email or other ways, get hydroxychloroquine or the other drugs that the doctor deems you need in any state in America, even if you live in New York like I do and Governor Cuomo says you can't. And one of my family members basically had her life saved by doing this, so I really believe in it. She was better the next day of COVID-19. I am not exaggerating. This is a treatable viral disease, but they must make believe you can't treat it. For the first time in history, Debbie, doctors have been told they can't use tried, true, inexpensive treatments to save lives. First time in history. It's obscene, it's disgraceful. We need to stand up for liberty, for the patient-physician liberty.
Actually, I was going to go right to you. I think your website, wearethepray.com, right? Wearethepray, Prey.com.
That's the dedicated website for the book, and then our website's Bregan.com.
Bregan.com. Well, I will say, Dr. Bregan, you've put together a lot of pieces. I have had many doctors on my show talking about the efficacy of various treatments, the danger of when people get intubated, and how that they soon figured out that was actually harmful. At that point, the lungs had so deteriorated, it's very harmful. But you're putting together some really big pieces, and I haven't pulled all these together in the way you just did. So back in 2017, the legislation you're describing that authorized the rapid emergency, I can't quite read my own hand, but emergency authorization to process treatments, including vaccines, if there was not otherwise a success, without going through the success and efficacy standards they normally apply, if there was no safe and effective treatment. So you're really saying that the decision by Anthony Fauci, others in the federal government, to reject the idea that hydroxychloroquine could work, budesonide could work, ivermectin could work. All of the statements they were trying to label them as ineffective, dangerous, all the words they used, was really to prevent the public perception that there was a safe and effective treatment, because then it allowed them to push this whole vaccine kind of takeover of the issue, that it was orchestrated as of 2017, correct?
Absolutely orchestrated. Johns Hopkins actually published a big paper that hardly anybody's heard about. I'm not talking about the one people know about, which was another in 2020. 2017, they put out a paper about vaccines and with a mock COVID, SARS-CoV pandemic. But this is not the later thing in 2020, in which they said we would have to basically crush citizen complaints and make believe that the new vaccine, which they called COVAX after COVID. So there was a whole bunch of things happening in 2017. A foundation called SETI, CETI, was set up by Gates, billions of dollars being pumped into it to advance research on vaccines. All these people, wealthy people, governments, corporations, including the corporation that got the first vaccine through, all of them were working together more than 3 years ahead of time, creating basically warp speed and this government collaboration, which is being called the Great Reset, all 3 years ahead of time. I don't know how it's been missed. I missed it in the beginning. It's all on videos. It's all there, or in print. It's all there.
Yep. Actually, your book, again, for my listeners, because I want to mention a couple of things about your book. Is called COVID-19 and the Global Predators, We Are the Prey, P-R-E-Y, by Dr. Peter Breggin and Ginger Breggin. And among the things you do in the book, and I love this because you're not just going from your medical perspective and your medical training, but you're really bringing in the entire cultural and political environment in America today. Because you're getting us around to the notion that how we should be thinking about COVID is not just should I take a vaccine, yes or no, should I try this or that treatment, no, but recognize it's a fundamental threat to America's freedom. I've been on this path on this show many times talking about the idea in no other context of any kind of disease problem have we so fundamentally surrendered our freedoms, submitted to all sorts of shutdown of American society, culture, behavior, churches, everything shut down. And it wasn't just that we surrendered to a rather onerous, very onerous and unprecedented closure of American society, but we became a more submissive people. We became, not me, not you, but a lot of people became just so afraid of what COVID might do that they just decided, I'm just going to wait for the government to tell me what I'm allowed to do, when I'm allowed to do anything. And we lost that American spirit of self-reliance and strength and independence. And you're saying that is all part of this design to end up having us be more submissive to ultimately this globalist agenda. Is that correct?
Yes, and this is, I want to say, just to give a sense of my background and Ginger's, this is not the first time we've taken on the giant federal government. Back in the 1990s, we discovered a eugenics federal program to go into the inner cities of America to find out, quote, what made black children so violent genetically and biologically. And we took 4 years out of our lives. We don't get any money for any of our reform work. And we stopped this program against African-American children. And I also want to say that my very first reform work was inspired when I found out that children of color, black children, at the University of Mississippi in the 1970s, this is at Jackson, were having their brains punctured with needles and having holes burned in them and experiment on it, kids as young as 5. And Ginger and I wrote a book, The War, it's out of print now, The War Against Children of Color. So I just want people to know the breadth of our background and that we have fought for minorities, we have fought for freedom all of our adult lives. But this is the biggest test of freedom since the American Revolution and the Civil War. The biggest test of freedom is going on now. And, my heart quakes for what we're facing and what could happen if it goes much further and Americans are turned into docile people rather than the independent, fierce in defense of ourselves and our families people that we have been since the founding of the country and even before then. We're unique in the world as individuals who will fight for freedom. We fought in World War I, we fought in World War II, and yeah, we fought in misguided wars, but we have always tried to be a people. I don't know about our politicians, but as a people, we have wanted to fight for freedom. They're taking that away from us. That will be the end of freedom in the world.
Could not agree more. And I'll tell you something, some of the things you're saying today, I've talked to people around the country, whether they are political colleagues or talk show hosts or just friends from college and law school. And I think the hardest thing for most Americans who believe in our country, love our country, they cannot believe that everything they've been hearing out of Washington with respect to COVID, everything they've been hearing about the efficacy of masks, the need for a vaccine, could be not only false, but could be part of some grand, larger plan. And I think that for many people, because I'm the first, I will criticize a lot of conspiracy theories. I don't like conspiracy theories. Yeah. I've never listened to Q in my whole life. I don't even know how you find Q. I don't want to. But this thing, the whole notion of my talk show and anyone's determination to figure out life, what you should really want to get to is what is truth, not whether how it's labeled, whether it's labeled as far out, tin hat, conspiracy theory. What is truth? And everything you put in this book, I mean, I can tell from the skim I did, from the table of contents, you've laid out the case that how we handled COVID in our country, the people in power in this country, whether they are just the financial elites, the ruling class elites, or people in government, we're going to enable to use this COVID virus as a means to fundamentally transform America, fundamentally transform us into submission to the Great Reset that the left has wanted. And honestly, Marxist thinking people have wanted for decades. They wanted to fight that American spirit of freedom and free markets and just self-reliant optimism, upbeat spirit. So I think it's incumbent on people to read what you've written, because there are so many facts. People kept saying, well, it doesn't add up. The numbers don't add up. Here we have hardly anyone dying anymore. We have the numbers are going down. The contagious numbers are going down. Everything's going down. But still somehow we have expanded efforts to control our population based on COVID. The behavior of the government does not make sense based on the facts we know. So we're about out of time. I'll give you the last chance for a closing point you'd like to make.
I'll give you a factoid. I talked with a physician from Australia yesterday, and they had in their main city in Victoria one of the lowest death rates and one of the lowest infection rates in the world, and yet they had the worst crackdown. And I said, what's the connection to China? He said, we're a part of that new open road that China's building, which tremendously under the influence of the communists. Folks, one last word. I can't be a conspiracy theorist. I testify in courts. I have been an expert witness at least 100 times in courts and been verified many times over before courts, by federal courts, by state courts. I've had 30 books published, about 6 of them straight medical books. I've published about 70 scientific articles, peer-reviewed journals. I am science-based. I did not expect to find what I found. Ginger did not expect to find what she found. This is all hard fact-based, and a lot of it confirmed now by many other doctors I've interviewed, on my own little show, and just many doctors now, most recently, General Spaulding talking about China in an interview I did with him today. This is real. We are in trouble in America. I'm saying we need refounders of America. Join the refounders of America. We've got to get ourselves together to stand up for liberty.
Could not agree more. I've just met you today, but I'll tell you, you're singing my tune. The whole point of my show is speaking up for the unique, extraordinary greatness of America, the founding principles, the idea of liberty. We are unique in all the world, and it's incumbent on every generation to stand up and speak up to preserve this country. And the closing shot is you have, I said I want to talk more about the vaccine passports. There's no reason for, in order to protect the American population, no reason for the vaccine passport plan to be in place, period, full stop, correct?
Absolutely true. It's strictly the beginning of what they already have in communist China. They just want to get us under control and under passports. This is no exaggeration. COVID-19 is a cover story. It's not even as dangerous as the flu for the vast majority of people in this country.
Dr. Breggin, this was so illuminating. I hope we can have you on again. Your book is fabulous. I will get the whole thing off the website. And I thank you so much for taking time to join us today.
You bring out the best in me, Debbie. You just call and I'll be there.
Thank you, sir, so much. Thank you for joining us. Well, folks, I was going to tell you, I'm getting text messages. The jury in Minneapolis has already reached a verdict. It was to be announced basically 10 minutes ago. So it's to be announced 4:30 Eastern, 3:30 Central, or past 3:30. I believe I have websites up. I have my texting buddy here telling me what's up. But the jury has reached a verdict. I hope it comes in before the end of the show. I was going to do a little segment about my membership thing, but I think I'll put that off till tomorrow because I want to talk about this jury verdict, whatever it's going to be. Normally, people assume, there were numerous charges against this officer. Normally, people assume when a jury comes back quickly in a criminal case, they assume the jury is going to let the person off. That's the standard lawyer's assumption. If a criminal criminal case jury is back quickly, they found not guilty. Because if they're going to go to guilty, they have to go through each of the charges, and can they get each juror to find guilty or not guilty on each charge? It usually takes longer. That's not a rule. That's a kind of a rule of thumb, but it's obviously not absolute. The jury has come back, and I will tell you, folks, I really, no matter what the verdict is, I really urge you, the biggest victim in this entire process has been the criminal justice system in America. The criminal justice system that is being bullied and harassed by leftists who've decided they are going to decide for America, for the case. What is the answer? They're going to decide how the jury should come out. These jurors, no matter what they come up with, I will tell you, I've been in a capital murder jury. Where the defendant was charged with capital murder, and he had friends. It's to be read in the next few minutes. In the courtroom after we came back with our verdict, and I happened to be the foreman of the jury. We literally, all of us, got escorted to our cars individually by a marshal. Get in your car, get out of here. These jurors are heroes, no matter what the outcome. I still think if there is to be a criminal conviction on any charges, I assume this officer will have a very significant likelihood of getting reversal on appeal because of the interference in this case, by political figures in this country for political gain. Maxine Waters did not show up at the courthouse in Minneapolis because she's deeply concerned about the jury system. She shows up for political theater. Al Sharpton's there, having flown there in a private jet, by the way, shows up to rally the troops. They are there to agitate America, to keep America racially divided, to encourage people of color in America to assume that our system is unfair. Their very presence is an argument. Their very presence in the streets of Minneapolis is an argument. They don't believe in the criminal justice system in our country, and they are deliberately agitating the people, and they're deliberately attempting to sway this jury. So no matter what they come out with, we have to all stand up for our system. We have to push back. There need to be penalties for people who interfere with a jury. They couldn't find, by the way, whoever left the pig's head on someone's porch, but on that officer's porch. But any kind of criminal conduct, the answer cannot be, as it has been in the past in many Democrat-run cities, let them riot. They're angry, let them riot. Baltimore, that happened. Other major cities. We can't crack down. If we ever want to get America back with an orderly rule of law and an orderly criminal justice system, we have to act more like Governor DeSantis of Florida, who just signed a law yesterday saying, you know what, we honor the First Amendment, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, don't take one step toward rioting. Not one smashed window, not one car burned, not one intimidated tourist or citizen. The only way to get America back on track is to hold people who are willing to break the law to push their point of view, to hold them accountable. I had one other quick story I was going to do today. I'll talk about membership tomorrow. I'll get a slide ready. But I want to just tell you, speaking of how much politics sways what we think is true in this country, how much politics sways. Back on January 6th, as you all likely know, my last little segment, back on January 6th, this was the day that the members of Congress, House and Senate, met together along with then Vice President Pence, whose job it was as President of the Senate to carry out this duty. They met to open the envelopes to look at the votes that came in from the various states from the Electoral College. Most people, most years, no one even pays attention to this particular aspect. People wait to election night. Everyone's got a tally, understanding how many Electoral College votes each state gets. They can run the numbers. And so the president is decided in the minds of the people on election night if you have actual results, which we did not this year, because we know the number of Electoral College votes. So then it goes to the Electoral College, and then the next step is to this meeting in Congress, which happened January 6th. I'm getting around to telling you that these are procedures in the Constitution set up for a reason. They weren't there just to fill up and make more procedures because we like procedures. So January 6th, we had the meeting in Congress where many people were hopeful, and some members of the Senate and some members of the House went along with this idea that because some of the states had had their electoral votes certified and their members of the Electoral College had certified the vote, those people, the Electoral College vote was made before the states realized how much fraud had occurred in the 2020 elections, before people realized about how much the mail-in ballot fraud had wreaked havoc on the system, how much the interference with electronic voting machine tabulation software had occurred. The members of the legislatures in various states kind of figured out after Election Day, hey, wait a minute, something went wrong here. We're not sure we got the answer right. We're not sure we got the tally correct. So you had those people in some states telling Congress, hey, we're not too sure that we sent you the accurate answer about the vote count in our state. So people were hoping in Congress that the House and Senate would send back the votes, Electoral College votes, to some states. But they didn't do that, and it would have been unprecedented. It was permissible, but it would have been unprecedented. And then Vice President Pence decided he wasn't going to do that. He didn't want to participate in that. So then we had Trump gives his speech across town on January 6th, tells the troops, as the assembled masses in Washington, who by this time are well aware of all the allegations of election fraud. There in Washington, far away, I think it was 1.5 miles away or something from the Capitol. Trump gives his speech. He says at the end, to go to the Congress to peacefully and patriotically protest, fight for an accurate vote. Then you had the whole incident in the Capitol, in the U.S. Capitol, where you had windows broken, people broke in, violence, a very scary, alarming situation. As I've said enough times on this show, and I'll say it again, I did not advocate violence. I wasn't there in Washington. I do not advocate violence. I did not advocate for any of the violence that occurred that day. I also said that there were people in Washington that day who represented the American left. You had Antifa and Black Lives Matter Marxist rioters in Washington that day also, assembling near the Capitol, apparently inside the Capitol. So inside the Capitol, the riot occurring in there was not just Trump supporters. It was a mix of Trump supporters as well as Antifa, Black Lives Matter, and whoever else happened to be there. And I talked about this a few weeks ago, and I really want to reinforce this to you. Just the way you were just hearing Dr. Bregan talk about the leftists seized on COVID as a means to take away American freedom, the leftists in this country, the left-wing mindset, the leftists who think never let a good crisis go to waste, seized on the January 6th incident at the Capitol to paint the picture, the false picture to the American people that what was happening in the Capitol was an insurrection, was an actual effort to take down the government, to, burn the place down or kill people or something horribly violent. And the insurrection narrative was played out as the Department of Justice, the FBI Department of Justice, investigated pretty much everyone who breached the Capitol that day, everyone who went in, whether they committed a crime or not. People were questioned, people were charged, and why they were there and how long they were there and what they did. The Department of Justice was more aggressive in investigating who got inside the Capitol that day than they were in the entire preceding year of violent, ongoing, massive mob-level riots in this country, in cities around the country, by BLM and Antifa. The determination of the Department of Justice and the FBI to track down every single person who entered the Capitol was unprecedented, especially as compared with their failure to do all that much about what was happening in the riots in the cities around our country, in the cities and towns around our country. But part of the narrative, and what I'm getting at is so important to understand, is part of the narrative was to try to paint the picture that there was an attempted insurrection that day and that Trump supporters wanted to commit an insurrection, tried to commit an insurrection, which did not happen, and to justify the now barbed wires around the Capitol. We have fencing, barbed wires, we have machine gun officers patrolling around the Capitol. All of that is to continue the effort to manipulate the American people to think that Trump supporters, all 80 million of them who voted for him, Trump supporters are on the edge of insurrection, on the edge of trying to take over the government, on the edge of trying to and none of that is true. And the left knows it isn't true, and the media knows it's not true. But they get political mileage out of propping up that day's, and I'm not defending the violent behavior of anyone that day. I'm not defending it. I agree. If you broke windows or committed violence of any kind, you have to be prosecuted. But I want to get around to about the truth emerging in the Capitol. A part of the truth that is emerging is the Department of Justice had to put out a notice essentially saying, hey, you know what? As it turns out, even though we know everyone in the country, all the leftists in the country are dying to find, big numbers of prosecutions, that we have a whole bunch of people who committed crimes, the DOJ put out, and all of the left-wing media in this country, Politico and Slate and all those types, had to run articles saying, hey, people, if you were expecting a large number of prosecutions, not going to happen. Because it turns out very few people committed crimes that day. And most of the crimes committed were misdemeanors. I mean, felonies are bigger crimes, misdemeanors, lower crimes. You might have had people commit misdemeanors. Very few felonies occurred. And so the DOJ is trying to tamp down the enthusiasm, the exuberance among leftists in this country, hoping the DOJ was going to be able to lock up a bunch of Trump supporters. But there were no facts to justify that. There were some people prosecuted, or they're lined up to be prosecuted, and people have pled guilty to some things because they don't want to wait for trial, or they can't wait for trial. But the point is, far fewer crimes than the left was trying to paint, many more misdemeanors and felonies, and also the FBI has just acknowledged that there were no weapons found among the Trump supporters in the Capitol. Please process that fact. Pretty dang wimpy insurrection, wouldn't you say, if you show up at the Capitol with no weapons except your loud mouth. I mean, or flags. They show up with flags, waving flags. This was an insurrection, but no weapons involved. Please believe me, the left is manipulating this entire incident at the Capitol on January 6th for the purpose of painting an ugly and false picture about the Trump supporters, about conservative America, about the right, the people on the right in America. Well, now another big thing came out, and I want to make sure and tell you the details of it. So you remember that they talked about 5 people died that day? 5 people died. And you had the impression from countless headlines that 5 people were somehow beaten to death or somehow murdered by Trump people. Okay, none of that happened. It didn't happen. The only murder, the only shot fired and someone killed was by a Capitol police officer killing an unarmed American woman who was a veteran. And they have announced recently the Capitol police officer will not be charged. He or she is remaining anonymous. It's apparently a he. There's some speculation about who it is, but they won't officially confirm who it was, and not going to be charged. No charge at all for shooting and killing someone inside the Capitol who wasn't armed. So that stands. The other deaths that were, there were 2 people that had heart attacks that day, which, as far as we know, they may have had a heart attack wherever they happened to be that day. Somebody else. There was someone else who was somehow crushed in some of the activity that day. But the big story, the big thing that's out right now, has to do with the Capitol police officer named Brian Sicknick. Brian Sicknick, S-I-C-K-N-I-C-K, who did die that day. He didn't die there. He was a Capitol police officer. He was in the Capitol that day, and many of the left-wing sources in this country, many left-wing sources reported that he, including the Washington Post, all the big left-wing outlets reported that he was beaten over the head with a fire extinguisher and later died from his injuries. That was the story put out. So painting a picture of wild, crazy conservatives beating a Capitol police officer over the head with a fire hydrant. So now the truth comes out. That never happened. He was not beaten over the head with anything. In fact, the statement by the D.C. medical examiner. The medical examiner himself put out this statement. Francisco Diaz, the medical examiner for Washington, D.C. Brian Sicknick, most unfortunately, died from natural causes. He had two strokes the day after this event. And this medical examiner went on to say, so the day after January 6th, he went on to say, number one, that there is no evidence, zero evidence of any type of internal or external injury. No head injury, no beaten over the head with a fire extinguisher. That didn't happen. Well, then the other story the left tried to flow as well, yeah, but some of the people who got inside there, they had bear spray, you know, some kind of really powerful spray you use, I guess, to scare away bears. Bear spray, and that bear spray was sprayed, and you know, this might have gotten in his face, and that's what he died of, results of the bear spray. That also, the D.C. medical examiner said, no, untrue. He also said, he went on to explain, the autopsy found no evidence, zip, zero, nada, nothing, no evidence that this, unfortunately, 42-year-old officer suffered an allergic reaction to any chemical irritant. Because the argument had been maybe whatever he was, if there was spray, it got near him, maybe it caused his throat to seize up. No, no evidence. And I want to, you know, I am thrilled that this is true. I don't actually want anyone to be murdered. I'm against murder, and I'm against people being violent. I am really incensed and outraged that this story, months later, that was January 6th, we went through February, March, April, we're 3.5 months later, we finally get the D.C. medical examiner who had to have known, what, within a week, what the answer was. The story finally is out now, saying, you know what, actually the whole lie we told about the fire hydrant thing never happened. I mean, the fire extinguisher didn't happen. No injuries, no interior injuries, no external, no cuts, no bruising, nothing was on this guy. Sadly, and I'm sorry for him and his family, his loved ones, I'm sorry when anyone passes on. I really am. I'm sure it was heartbreaking, but his death the day after January 6th had nothing to do with what happened on January 6th. So now we are at a point where the insurrection was by unarmed people who hurt no one. The Capitol Police, the only person who committed a violent murder that day was a Capitol Police officer shooting at a woman who was unarmed. She was, this is a former military person, she was climbing in one of the windows that was broken. I mean, she apparently did not break the window to get in, but people, when the doors got closed, people broke windows to get in. She climbed in, that's when she was shot. Now, I mean, I'm going to guess in any other context, I want you to picture the reaction of the media if somehow, you know, the officer was white and the person who was shot was black, or maybe the officer was white and the person shot black and it didn't happen at the Capitol but happened in some other riot. I mean, just imagine if in some other riot in the middle of one of these one of these things we were watching all last summer with the Black Lives Matter and Antifa and all those other groups, if a white police officer had shot and killed a black protester. Now, to be clear, both the people involved in this Washington situation, Brian Sicknick, as well as the woman, the military person, veteran who was killed, were white. I'm not saying race was a part of it. I'm just getting at the way the media treats stories. It's always with a narrative. It's always with a, well, can we find some way here to divide America, to stir up racial hatred, to stir up racial suspicion? There's nothing to this story in the Capitol Hill, you know, and so the officer gets to remain anonymous. No charges of any kind, no question about his use of force. Compared with, I mean, this is kind of an amazing actual segue or comparison while I think about it. The officer in Washington who shot and killed the woman veteran who was unarmed, he's going to have no charges at all, and she wasn't attacking him. She wasn't attacking anybody. She was trying to get in the Capitol through a broken window, but she wasn't attacking anybody. Now you look at what we're about to hear about. We hope before the show ends. I can't tell. I keep watching my news sources here to see if we get the story out, what the verdict is going to be in the Chauvin case. But, you know, you compare that to Chauvin case. This officer is trying to restrain someone who has been resisting arrest, who has been, and who said before he was pinned down on the ground, I can't breathe, I can't breathe, I can't breathe. And the entire nation is watching with bated breath to find out what's going to happen to this officer, Officer Chauvin. Well, you know, we may get the end of my show and I can't, we got to wrap it up. I'm sorry to say, I was really hoping the verdict might come out. I will certainly write about this. I will certainly talk about in tomorrow's show that whatever the verdict is, I think actually what they've got to do now in Minneapolis, as this verdict is about to be read, they have to be careful to protect the jurors. They have to be careful to be sure the jurors can be escorted safely no matter what the verdict is. They have to get them out of harm's way. They've probably got to get them all out of their homes and somewhere else, because unless this jury did exactly what the mob demanded, as in the form of Maxine Waters demanded yesterday, unless they did exactly what was demanded of them, you know, they're going to have to watch their backs. They're going to have to be very careful for a long time, because we live in an era where the mob has been convinced in this country, yeah, you get to kind of run things. You just tell us what's going to happen, and we're all so scared to death of you that we'll let you do it. But we are apparently out of time, and I can't hold on any longer, so I will do the end of the show. Tomorrow we'll talk about this for sure. Tomorrow we have Sam Sorbo joining us. Her husband, Kevin Sorbo, was on last week. Sam Sorbo joins us tomorrow. We'll talk about this verdict. I have so many more stories and time. Never can get to all the stories I want to talk with you about. But I love talking to you every day, Monday through Thursday, 3 p.m. Central Time. And now I'll go and tell you why the stories we talked about today matter to you. So we started the day talking about the Floyd Chauvin mistrial. Apparently didn't have to go there, but judge in the Chauvin trial denies the motion for mistrial over Maxine Waters' actions, but raised the possibility that Waters may have provided grounds for overturning any guilty verdict on appeal. I would say so. Expert witness in the Chauvin defense, a former California resident in his former house in California, found with a severed pig's head and blood all over the front porch. Whether it's genuine outrage of an honest, misguided American or paid thuggery, this is a grotesque interference in America's criminal justice system. Americans are watching their judicial system be dismantled by deliberate mob tactics and egged on by an elected Democrat congresswoman whom Pelosi will not even denounce. Americans must rise to defend their rule of law and refuse to be governed by mobs. And truth emerging, January 6th at the Capitol, why it matters. Official medical examiner findings. Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick died of natural causes. No evidence of internal or external injuries, no evidence of a reaction to bear spray or any other substance. The mainstream media ignited a firestorm throughout the country by lying about Officer Sicknick's death. Mainstream media claims Sicknick was bludgeoned by a Trump protester wielding a fire extinguisher. I really would love to see the mainstream media issue a massive apology for that, really defaming the followers of Donald Trump, the supporters of Donald Trump. This adds to earlier FBI DOJ finding that there were no arms found in the Capitol on January 6th. Some insurrection, huh? The swamp mainstream media insurrection narrative was meant to stop examination of the election fraud. That's exactly why they made this narrative up. So silence everyone who wanted to talk about election fraud. It became something you can't talk about. The swamp mainstream media insurrection narrative was and is a manufactured deception. The damage the mainstream media is doing with its willful deceit is incalculable and will not be undone by retractions and corrections. The mainstream media will reform, if at all, when they fear going bankrupt. So do your part. Help them go bankrupt. Don't listen, don't read, don't subscribe. Shut down mainstream media and punish them for the way they manipulate America. I'm Debbie Georgatos. This is America Can We Talk. You can go to our website, americacanwetalk.org. On the homepage under shows, drop down list of links, read the links to stories from today. You can subscribe to our newsletter. I can't encourage you strongly to subscribe. Go to the website, americacanwetalk.org. Hit that subscribe button. You get a once-a-week newsletter from me. Great way to catch up on the show on the weekends. Great way to share the show. Would love to have you do that. And we now have a membership thing going, which I will tell you more about tomorrow. So thank you so much for tuning in to America Can We Talk, where I always talk truth about America because America matters. And I'll talk to you next time.
America Can We Talk? Truth about America.